speaking to you on this day of International Women's Day, International Women's Day. I think most of what I want to talk about is not just the work itself. What I've done is one thing, right? Everybody talks to you about the research and things like that. I thought I would take this opportunity today to talk to you about some of the not just the work, but some of the emotional journeys that I think everybody goes through, but entrepreneurs in a particular go through, because entrepreneurship ends up being a fairly, I would say, difficult journey of self discovery. So that might be something unusual to hear, but I think that is the absolute truth, which I'm realizing as I go ahead in my own journey. So you've already heard the introduction, so I'm not going to go too much into who I am. In addition to being an entrepreneur, I'm a scientist, I'm a diagnostician. And of course, as all of us are, we are part of our societal fabric. So I'm also a daughter, a wife, and a mother. I love ideas, and I love to persuade people of ideas that I'm excited about. And early on, I decided that what I would embrace is an identity of constantly growing and constantly learning. So that way, every experience ends up being a winner, ends up being a victory. Because if you're always learning, if you're always growing, there is no such thing as a bad experience. What I would like to focus on for the next few minutes of this session is really reflect on what entrepreneurship means and who an entrepreneur is. I'm sure all of you would have been hearing this word entrepreneurship so much in the past 5 or 6 years, in school, in colleges. That really seems to be the buzzword. And this is a new word for people of my generation, I think. I did not hear about this word until I was much older. I'd like to describe my own journey in entrepreneurship, and I'd like to discuss mental barriers to success. And this is not just mental barriers, I think these are universal mental barriers. Let's put that there. The best definition of entrepreneurship that I found online is really an entrepreneur is someone who is inspired from within. He or she has this antarprerna. So a lot of entrepreneurships and entrepreneurs start when there is a perception of a need. An entrepreneur sees a problem or a gap in society or in business or something else, or in some process it already exists, and is moved or touched in some way by this problem or gap. So many times you would see entrepreneurs who are like, you know what, I experienced this, or somebody whom I really appreciate experienced this, and this has driven me to solve this problem. And an entrepreneur usually tries to work to bridge this gap. And at the end of it, the whole idea of entrepreneurship is to create something of value, which is social, emotional, financial, artistic, it doesn't matter. There has to be value that is created at the end of it. When you think about it, when does one start thinking this way? When does one start thinking about a problem that needs to be solved? When you think about all your needs in your life, you have something called, you can actually classify them in terms of hierarchy. And this is what a guy called Maslow did. And he basically said, here is the hierarchy of needs that any individual anywhere in the world will experience. At the basic foundational level, there is the physiological need. If you don't have roti, kapda, or makan, you're really not going to be worrying about, the status of the world. You need to have a basic sense of security, where you're like, okay, my food, water, shelter has been taken care of. I feel secure, I feel safe. Only then can I actually start having the mental energy to start thinking about something beyond that. When you think about this Maslow's hierarchy, it also kind of tells you why only countries that have reached a certain level of security and safety can actually think about investing in their entrepreneurs and their entrepreneurships. India, when you think about it in terms of when in the first few years of independence, in the even I would say even about 20-25 years ago, before opening our markets out for globalization. Most of our needs were only in the terms of physiological and safety needs. And when you have a country, or when you have a society, when you have an individual who is still focused only on those 4 or 5 basic needs, it's impossible to start thinking about something bigger. Once you have that, then you need to have your social networks, intimate relationships, family and friends. You have to feel like you've accomplished something in the world. If you're insecure about that, again, there's going to be very little chance that you actually have the opportunity to think bigger and beyond. Only when all these are satisfied can someone actually think about thinking, what is my potential? What really makes me satisfied and fulfilled? And can you and if it could be something like, maybe I want to see more greenery around me, maybe I want to make sure that the people around me are able to get access to food and shelter the way I am. Maybe I see that, the traffic around me, there's so much of air pollution. Maybe I really want to solve that problem. Only when the first 4 or 5 levels are complete can you actually go beyond to self fulfillment. So the entrepreneur sits actually at the top of the pyramid. And a person can only be an entrepreneur when inside themselves they feel like they have the security and the support to actually be able to think beyond. And this is also, I think, one of the reasons why entrepreneurship is such a big thing in this generation, in these past 20 years or so. Because our own self of our own sense of accomplishment, of security, is very closely linked to the sense of accomplishment and security of our society and of our country. If you don't feel that your country is doing well, your society won't feel that, and you inside will be like, you know what, I really need to be leaving this country to go to a different country. And I think this is basically, so when you think about it, entrepreneurship and the feeling of entrepreneurship is very closely related to your external world as well. Not only is it driven by a sense of internal purpose, it is also influenced strongly by the external world. We keep hearing a lot about entrepreneurship, but why is that really different from business? How is an entrepreneur different from a businessman? You see plenty of businessmen. I mean, India has been, when you think about it of the history of India, we've had businessmen 3,000, 4,000 years ago. When you see Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, the artifacts from that, there are artifacts talking about business. How is that any different from entrepreneurship? Regardless of whether it's an entrepreneurship or a business, regardless of whatever it is, whether what kind of an organization it is, whether it's a for-profit, multinational conglomerate, or whether it's a not-for-profit, small NGO that you start in your house, every successful organization has to create 5 things, has to satisfy 5 requirements. A, it has to create or provide something of value. It has to be something that other people want or need. It has to be at a price that other people are willing to pay, in a way that satisfies that person who is paying for it, the purchaser's needs and expectations, and provides the business sufficient revenue or motivation for the person who begins the business, for the businessman or the entrepreneur, to continue to want to engage in the process. All right. So think about these 5 criteria, and you will realize that every single organization in your lives has to satisfy these 5 if it wants to thrive. Right. I don't think there's actually very much difference between an entrepreneurship and a business. When it comes to day-to-day practice, there is actually absolutely no difference. People will tell you that entrepreneurship is defined by innovation. And what is innovation? When you think about it, it's the creation, development, and implementation of a new product or a process or a service. It doesn't just have to be a product. It could be either a process or a service. And with the aim of improving the efficiency, effectiveness, or competitive advantage. If this is the definition of innovation, who's to say that a business cannot be an innovation? Who's to say that innovation that in fact, when you think about it, no business can thrive or survive without innovation at every single level. So I do not agree to the thing that innovation defines entrepreneurship. I think innovation is necessary for any organization to survive. When I reread all these things, I started wondering, is molecular solutions really an entrepreneurship or a business? And I think that the main difference between an entrepreneurship and a business is really in the stage of maturity. Businesses have figured out a business model. They know what they're selling, they know how much they're getting for it, they know their processes in order to maximize their profits. Entrepreneurships are still trying to figure out what this is. In molecular solution, it is both an entrepreneurship as well as a business. The MSCH COVID-19 RT-PCR lab started in August 2020, and since then we have done more than 2 lakh tests. This RT-PCR lab for COVID is a business. It has a business model. It has the right partners that will help it with logistics and supply chain. It has the scale, it has the processes, it has the systems. And it has a revenue agreement between all these various people who've actually made it possible, the logistics, the supply chain, the stakeholders and things like that. Molecular solution existed before COVID. And most of what we were doing then were things like other diagnostics for HIV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, for bloodborne disorders, for veterinary diagnostics. We had multiple research projects. One of the things that was talked about in the introduction was the Department of Science and Technology grant that we got. We are involved in a lot of planetary health research and implementation, in public health research and implementation. And we're also consultants for multiple labs and public health organizations. These are not businesses in the fact that they are not mature processes that churn out a product, churn out some kind of a service in the same way every single way. There is no exact consistency in what the inputs are, what the processes would be, and what the outputs would be. It's not a predictable, it's not a well set thing for every single business or product. We are like, okay, let's change it like this, let's change it like that, depending on what we think our customers would like. So the business models for all these processes are still under progress. So very similar to when you think about big organizations like General Electricals, GE, or Apple, many of them have intrapreneurships and they have their businesses. Intrapreneurships are when you have the same entrepreneurship model, when you have some kind of an innovation, some kind of a thing in flux, which is within a larger existing business. When you think about MSCH, the problem that moved me and got me into entrepreneurship and all these various models that are still evolving was the burden of diagnostic testing. When you think about it, the diagnostic journey is not a simple one. It may be simpler when you're in a large city like Bangalore or Pune. But when you're even when you go to a slightly smaller city, in Bangalore, the example I typically use is that of Mysore. It's 3 hours from Bangalore. Has a very rich cultural heritage. It's not a small city by any means, but it is still does not have the amenities that Bangalore does. So, for example, if somebody were to be prescribed a diagnostic lab test, first you go to the doctor, you get your prescription, then you find a diagnostic lab that is close to you. You go there, you have to make an appointment. You may have to go there and give your sample. You have to wait for your test to come back. Then you take the report, go back to your doctor. The doctor will then this thing. Sometimes when you think about it, let's say if you are a daily wage earner, that's your entire day gone. You've basically not been able to make money during that time. Many times you will notice that you don't actually know which lab to go to. You may think of the big lab, but that may be really expensive. Then you go to a little lab. The little lab may then give your sample to the big lab, and they may have some kickbacks involved. Ultimately, for the patient, it is not an easy, intuitive journey. This particular picture is actually from a paper by a group in India called the Institute of Public Health. And they've done a lot of work on why diagnostics in India is so incredibly burdensome. to people. What are the consequences of not getting timely diagnostics in healthcare? Well, that's fairly obvious, right? You have increased morbidity and mortality rates. You may have drug resistance, because if you don't know if the medication that you're taking is working, and if you can't figure it out in time, and you go on taking the wrong medication, and you're all students of pharmacy, so you completely get, I think, what I talk about when I talk about drug resistance and non-adherence to medications, or or late diagnosis of resistance. The incidence of disease goes up. The economic burden of disease treatment goes up. Imagine if you're going to, if you realize that, let's say, some of the medications that you're taking are not working, you become obviously sicker and sicker. And you see this all the time when you think about TB or HIV, because many people, may not have the access to get tested for TB or HIV very quickly. They may not be put on the right medication straight away. And then what happens after that? By the time you actually end up to a hospital, you are much sicker than you would have been a few months ago. And so the economic burden of your treatment goes up. And all this actually, when you think about it, leads to social and economic collapse of communities. This is not an exaggeration. This is actually, I hope you're able to see this little graph. This basically tells you how a disease can change the landscape of a society. This is HIV. In red are the current, were the current age profiles of the workers in a mine in South Africa in 2002. And and you can see that most of the people working in the mines were between 30 and 45. That's where the peak of that graph is, right? But because of HIV, the 15-year projection you can see in white, it actually dips. The people who are most productive are actually the people whom you do not have availability of, because they're all either sick or dead because of HIV. And suddenly now you have larger and larger younger people joining the mines. And you can also see in the 50 to 54 group and the 55 to 59 group, the elderly are now having to come back to the workforce. This, in terms of large population numbers, when you look at these are African countries because of the HIV epidemic. Look at how beautifully the life expectancy at birth for most of these African countries was going up until 1990 or so. All these countries had gotten independence from various colonial pasts sometime in the 60s to 80s, in that 20-year period. And they were all beginning to do really well by themselves. Then HIV struck, and you can see the sheer drop in life expectancy. And now, after 2000, for almost 20 years, there was this utter flipping of who actually could go back to work and who was actually at home. And they actually call this the lost generation, because an entire generation of able-bodied young people were completely decimated by that disease. So what is the challenge that you see when you think about diagnostics and the healthcare triad? What you have are three main variables. There is access, obviously, there's cost, and there is quality. And there's always be a trade-off between these three. If you have higher access and higher quality, if you have higher quality and higher access, obviously the cost is going to go up. And so then obviously when the cost goes up, then maybe the access will come down. If you have higher access and lower cost, then the quality will come down. The real challenge is, how do you optimize this trade-off in your particular context? So when you think about the diagnostic landscape, you have a group of people, some of whom may be sick, some of whom may not be sick. In some cases, there is no need for diagnostics. A clinician will look at a person and say, you have this, please take this medicine, you will be fine. So clinical acumen is sufficient. In some cases, there is a need for diagnostics. Does this guy have diabetes and hypertension? Does this guy have only diabetes? How severe is this guy's diabetes? We don't know. Similarly, for infectious diseases, does this person have COVID? Does not have COVID? Is it just a common cold? All of you have gone through this COVID, this whole thing that we have as a society gone through for the past year. And I think all of you would have had this experience of, do I have a cold or do I have COVID question multiple times in your mind in the past few months. Now there is this thing. Do you do point of care testing, which is rapid, which gives you a result in minutes, which is cheap, it's reasonably accurate, or do you do a nodal kind of a test, which requires infrastructure, skills, and time? It may still be cheap, but it may be more accurate than POC, but it'll take a few more hours or days. Or would you go to an advanced, or do you need an advanced test which requires even more access, requires highly skilled technicians and longer times? I'll give you the example of COVID again, because all of us know this intimately after our experiences in the past year. The point of care test, can any of you think of the point of care test for COVID? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to think. You can raise your hands or something, or if you want to unmute yourself and tell me, that's also fine. Yes? No? Have you heard of the RAT, the rapid antigen test? So that would be your point of care, right? It is cheap, it is rapid, it is reasonably accurate in that. What did I mean by reasonably accurate? Do you guys has any, who over here has had experience with the RAT, the rapid antigen test for COVID? I am not able to see any hands up or anything like that. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. All right. Has any of you had an experience with RATs?
Yes, ma'am. I have had actually.
Very
I'm
good.
not really sure about the students, but yeah, there was a negative test in case of rapid antigen.
Yes.
But it was a positive in RT-PCR.
Correct, exactly. And do you know why that was followed up by RT-PCR? So the RAT,
maybe RT is not that sensitive.
Very good, exactly. Yes. So the RAT, if it's a positive, you know for sure you have the infection. But if it is negative, you don't actually know if you're truly positive or negative. All right. So that's what I meant when I say it's reasonably accurate. You don't actually know. So the RT-PCR would be an example of the nodal test. It requires an RT-PCR machine. It requires skill. It requires time. You probably, when you got your RT-PCR done, how long did the result come back? How many hours did it take?
24 hours.
24 hours, yeah, absolutely, correct. Maybe if you had got it even earlier in the pandemic, sometime in April or May, it might have even taken longer because people were still trying to figure out how to do this properly. And now, for example, all of you would have been hearing about COVID variants, right? What happens when you have a COVID, when people suspect that you have a COVID variant? What happens then? Do you know?
Students, you can unmute and answer.
Sorry?
No, I'm just instructing students to unmute and answer.
Oh, yeah, sure, sure. Oh, Pradnesh Sandikar is raising his hands. Pradnesh, are you online?
Yes, ma'am.
Very good. Okay, tell me what you want to say.
No, you just asked about the how many hours did the
Right.
RT-PCR result take? So I answered 24 hours.
Okay, very good. So now do you know what happens if people suspect that you might be having a COVID variant?
They just informed to check that check whether the other people have got infected or not.
Okay, good. All right. What else do they do? How do they figure out whether you have a variant or not? You've heard about the UK variant, the South
But by
Africa
saying,
variant. Huh. Sorry, say that again.
but uh, by taking the blood sample, we can diagnose that if the bacteria, COVID bacteria is present or not, or it would have been, or it would have been a new variant or this first time.
Huh. So they don't take blood, they take the same nasal swab only. But then what they do is they send it for
Sorry, nasal.
sequencing.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the RT-PCR, you're just looking for whether it's there or not. Then when what you do is you extract the RNA and you send it for sequencing to actually sequence the viral genome and figure out whether is this a new variant, is this an old variant, what is going on with it. So that would be an example of the advanced test. So that's basically something where you need more infrastructure, you need highly skilled technicians, and it takes almost a week for those results to come. So those would be like three types of tests when you think about the diagnostic landscape in any, it doesn't matter whether it's COVID or diabetes or whatever it is, these would be three types of tests. So when you think about opportunities for innovation in diagnostics, this is where basically where you can innovate. Can you make an RT-PCR into a few minutes? So have you guys heard of Feluda? You might have heard of it last year around October, November, like that. Feluda was a point of care test for amplification of the COVID genome, or sorry, a fragment of the gene anyway. And so that was basically trying to make an RT-PCR into a point of care. That was the innovation that they did. I think it was IIT Delhi or something like that that did that. Then you have, so basically you can move from point of care to nodal to advanced, any which way. And so you can innovate at multiple levels. Innovation does not have to be just in the way of making up new tests. In the case of your pharmaceutical, from a pharmaceutical context, it doesn't have to be creating a new drug. It could be, well, can I innovate in the terms of logistics? Can I get the drug that I have to the people who need them? Can I innovate in terms of training? If there is a drug that is very difficult for people to administer by themselves, can I innovate it in such a way that it's easier for people to take it by themselves or easier for a nurse to give it to them? Can I change the infrastructure that is required to make this drug? Supposing, I mean, pick some kind of a drug. I don't know, aspirin, let's say. Perhaps the infrastructure required for aspirin is very different from the infrastructure required for making perhaps insulin. And maybe to make insulin requires a huge influx of money to actually get the infrastructure in place for it. Then can you innovate in making the process of making insulin a little bit cheaper so that it's easier to manufacture it and therefore it'll be cheaper for ultimately for you to sell it and for the person who's buying it? Can you innovate in terms of lab workflows? Can you automate things? Can you create a different market for the same this thing? Instead of trying to wait for a test to give you some kind of a result, can you perhaps use artificial intelligence or machine learning? When it comes to your pharmaceutical context, instead of waiting for some person in a lab to go through multiple different combinations of drugs to figure out a new drug, can you perhaps use a machine? Can you perhaps write an algorithm for a computer to predict what the structure of the new drug might be? So these would be some amounts of innovations in diagnostics. As life scientists, whether it's pharmaceutical or biotechnologists or whatever, we tend to focus on one or two aspects of the things that we are most comfortable with. For example, as a biotechnologist, initially when I started off, I was like, I will make a new test, because that's all I knew at that time. As we mature and as we understand the ecosystem a little bit better, we are like, hang on a second, I might have made a new test, but does that really mean that more people are actually still able to get access to it? Maybe the gap is not in the lack of a test. The gap is in the lack of a logistic system that will help me take my test to the people who need it. Some of these innovations by MSCH, I think were already covered in the introduction. So I'm not going to focus too much on this because I really actually want to focus on some of the other interactive stuff. Before we get to the interactive stuff, however, this is what I want to say. When we go from whatever little narrow focused thing that we know to the broader based problems that the world has that you would like to solve, you realize that complexity becomes a lot more. There are multiple systemic stakeholders with multiple agendas. So for example, what I might be as a diagnostician is I want to make a better test. But what the supply guy who gives me the enzyme might be is I want to ensure that these people buy the more expensive enzyme for them to be able to do this test. What the phlebotomist who's collecting the blood would be like is, well, I really don't want them to switch to let's say a dried blood spot. I want them to continue to use liquid blood so that I continue to be in business. So you have lots of stakeholders here with very different agendas, and many of those agendas are often conflicting with each other. When you have a large problem centric thinking, you also have intellectual property ownership. Let's say in your own, from a pharmaceutical angle, let's say in the case of COVID, initially there was a lot of thing about, oh, can we find a new antiviral? Can we find a new drug that will cure COVID? They came up with remdesivir, they came up with so many different drugs. Who owns the intellectual property for this? So the commercial, and how much money does that person get? How much royalty does that person get? So the person who invents the drug may get one portion of it, because there'll be other people who put in intellectual energy in trying to figure out how to commercialize it. How do you how do you now figure out how to get this particular drug to the in the right formulation without it getting degraded to the person who needs it? And you see a lot of this in the vaccines. One of the reasons why why India did not go with, let's say, a Pfizer vaccine, which has to be kept at minus 80 degrees, is India was like, we don't really have that many minus 80 degrees freezers to get that vaccine from where it is picked up at the airport to where the person needs it. Instead, what India said was, let's make Covaxin, which is this inactivated viral particle. It does not require minus 80-degree freezing. It requires 4 degrees refrigeration. All of us have refrigerators. Every district hospital has a refrigerator. So that kind of this thing of who discovers or invents the vaccine or the drug to who actually gets where is the money actually made, and how much does each partner in this whole chain, how much reward does each person get? That is a whole big it's a fairly complex calculation, right? There could be unpredictable or uncontrollable responses. Again, in the case of COVID, who would have figured out that there were going to be variants that would not work with the vaccine, or the vaccine would not work with the variants? When you started off the vaccine production, vaccine design process last year, they would have been like, this is the spike, this is this protein, I'm going to make a vaccine like this. Similarly, who would have, again, coming from a pharmaceutical context, who would have thought that dexamethasone would actually be a lifesaver for COVID patients? It's, I think, dexamethasone only, right? It's some kind of a steroid that people give, which is very cheap. They were giving it for something else, and they realized that actually it would save lives in COVID. So that's an unpredictable response. And finally, you have iterative process with feedback from multiple end users. For example, one of the reasons why RAT, the test, got done was because everybody was like, man, this RT-PCR takes forever. And there's so many other problems with that. So complex problems need networks, not silos. You can't be one person. I'm a molecular biologist. I'm a pharmaceutical person. I'm a professor of this person or that thing. You're not going to be able to solve any problems if you work by yourself. You have to have a network of people with complementary and overlapping interests and abilities to be able to solve anything in the real world. So how do real world problems get solved? Does anybody have any examples of some kind of a problem that they might have solved themselves? I'm not talking about big things like, getting rid of COVID or anything like that. I'm talking about smaller things. How did you solve, let's say, getting a loan for your higher studies? How did your parents maybe solve the problem of financing for building a house. Those are all real world problems, right? How do you do that? And I think you will agree with me when I say, first, there has to be urgency. Like if you don't think that a problem is urgent, if you don't think, man, I need to get this loan so I can I can join my college next month, versus I need to get this loan so I can join my college 3 years from now, there's clearly a difference in urgency, right? So unless something is urgent, problems don't usually get solved. This is also, I think, one of the reasons why climate change as a problem doesn't get solved very fast, or people still don't believe it, because they're like, where is the urgency? I'm still seeing the birds in my tree. I'm still seeing trees. I'm still getting my food. But then I don't see the idea of, glaciers melting in Antarctica. It really doesn't have the same sense of urgency as it has when something is happening in your backyard, when something is actually affecting your life right now. You need investors of various types and risk tolerance. Even for, let's say, something like building a house or taking a loan, who is investing over there? Maybe the bank is investing. The bank is saying, okay, I'll give you a loan. There, the risk tolerance for the bank is very low. It's like, either you pay me my EMI now, or I'm going to get back your house, or I'm going to kick you out of your college, or something like that. Whereas somebody else, let's say you take money from someone else, maybe your relative, there the risk tolerance is higher. They're like, okay, maybe this guy's not going to be able to pay me back this month, but I'll wait for another few months. It requires technical expertise. If you don't know how to solve your problem, if you don't have expertise, or if you can't find someone who can guide you through the process, you're not going to be able to solve it. I'm talking about government buy-in for larger problems. I'm not talking about it in terms of housing. Oh, though I guess I could talk about it in terms of housing, because when a whole society as such wants to build houses and go to college, then the government says, okay, you know what, this is a big enough problem. Let's create schemes for loans and mortgages and things like that. Quality and turnaround time of the solution. If your bank is going to take 6 months to give you a loan versus another bank that's going to take you 1 month to give you a loan, you probably would want the turnaround time of 1 month versus 6 months, right? Because again, this has to do with your scale, with your urgency, with your perceived urgency of the thing. And finally, you have to have you have to have systems. How do you finance this? How do you figure out how to pay this guy back? Things like that. So the same 4 or 5 principles that are here, whether it's your own house or your college loan or like buying a scooter or whatever, it's almost a similar kind of a thing, analogous to large scale problems. How do you solve global hunger? How do you control a pandemic? Very similar principles. One of the things we have kind of evolved with molecular solutions ourselves is in this thing of moving past just diagnostics to looking at community diagnostics, moving past individual diagnostics, moving to community diagnostics. One of the things that we wanted to do, for example, is instead of looking at individual people and seeing COVID and then saying this community is more affected than that community, can you actually use something which can be a surrogate for individuals? So one of the things that we used was wastewater, because you might know that COVID RNA gets shed in people's stool. So if you can look at sewage of a community and test that for COVID, you might be able to say, this particular area, let's say Shaniwar Wada or someplace like that, or Shivaji Nagar, this place has more COVID RNA than Aundh or Baner Road. So maybe these particular localities are at higher risk of more, maybe these particular localities are going to be hotspots for COVID. Maybe the vaccination drive should actually focus on these communities first, then rather than putting it everywhere in like a non-targeted kind of a way. So our partners in this, we ourselves as a diagnostic lab would not have been able to do this. So we have partnered with a public health organization, we've partnered with a clinical group, we've partnered with government liaisons, we've partnered with environmental engineering groups, we've partnered with data analyst groups like STAND, because okay, you do the test, you get this number, but what does it actually mean in terms of interpretation? So only when you have these many people coming together to solve that one problem, might you actually be able to get closer to solving it. So 2 of the people that I've been working with and learning from a lot are one person called Mr. Venkatshan and one person called Mr. Prasanna Bhagwan. They both, as you can see, have very different capabilities than mine. Venkatshan is a pure businessman with expertise in construction. Prasanna Bhagwan is also a pure businessman with expertise in IP and legal and law. Uh, but when a person like me who is who has technical expertise works with people like this, I can promise you initially it's very difficult because the language is different. They are like, okay, you have the solution. Can you scale to 100,000? I'm like, no, I was actually thinking of scaling to 100. Then there is a language and an expectation mismatch. Once you go past the expectation mismatch is when you can actually start creating larger and better things. I've spoken to you a lot about external influencers of growth. I'm going to pause here a little bit because it's 11:26 and I have half an hour more before I come to internal influencers to ask you guys, do you have any questions? Are you following? Do you have, I see 3 more chats. Let's see what's going on. Oh, okay. These are questions by Dr. Wavale. Most of the diagnostic tests based on antigen and antibody, which increases their cost and complexity. Is there any way to develop diagnostics without it? What is the scope of development of diagnostics with cancer and hyperimmune disorders? Okay, very, very, very good questions. Let's come to the first question first. Most of the diagnostic tests are based on antigen and antibody and it is obviously expensive because it's expensive to create antigens and antibody. The ways people are doing to develop around that is by doing synthetic antibodies and antigens. Can you actually grow a particular piece of the protein that can act as an antigen, for example? So for example, in COVID, initially people were using the COVID spike protein. So they would actually grow the virus, extract the spike protein, coat that on various tests and so on. But as you correctly pointed out, it's very expensive to do that. So by the time the RAT tests in India rolled out, they had stopped using spike protein from viruses. They had basically engineered a system to keep spitting out just those portions of the spike protein to which antibodies would be developed. So that is one way by which people have worked around antigens. To work around the development of antibodies is still a little difficult. I think for the most part, people still use animal models to develop antibodies. There could be some synthetic antibodies that people have started using, but I'm not sure how close they are to commercial this thing. I could be wrong though, because I'm not that familiar with how people make antibodies outside of animal systems. What is the scope of development of diagnostics for cancer and hyperimmune disorders? Huge. Huge. What can I say? Cancer, as you can imagine, one of the most rapid fields in diagnostics is in cancer diagnostics. You might have heard of circulating free DNA. That's basically in blood. You actually have, if you have cancer anywhere in your body, it keeps spitting out DNA, right? As the cells undergo atrophy or necrosis, or apoptosis, they keep spitting out their DNA. Some of these DNA are markers for cancer. They actually have signatures of cancer on them. So can you actually just draw blood from someone and do deep sequencing and be able to identify certain markers of different cancers? That is something which is very, very, very big right now. Dr. Varsha, for hyperimmune disorders, I am not sure. I know there are multiple things going on for autoimmune disorders. I'm not sure what hyperimmune disorders would be, frankly. If you can tell me what kind of these things you're thinking about, I could look it up. So I don't know the answer to that. The technology you've developed for understanding the threat of COVID from wastewater analysis, is it being used today commercially? It is not being used anywhere in the world commercially. It is right now it has been integrated into the surveillance systems of many countries in the West, such as Netherlands, Germany, places like that. To get government buy-in is a pretty important thing for it to become commercially sort of viable. We actually have government buy-in. I'm going to show you this. There we go. You see this thing that says National Urban Health Mission, Bangalore City, etc., etc. So we got a letter from the Bangalore corporation saying that they would give us permission to go and collect sewage. Did you know that you have to get permission to collect sewage? Even though it is just sewage, you actually have to, if you go around collecting it without getting permission, you can get into trouble. So yeah, that was something that we learned during this. Is it being used commercially today? So this is actually something that we have started through our lab. We have started offering this to college campuses, because now that most people are coming back to colleges and staying in hostels, can you actually look at the sewage that is being kicked out of hostels to test for COVID? And could that be an early determinant of a particular hostel being at a higher risk for COVID? So as far as I know, right now, we're the only people doing this commercially. And we haven't even started properly. We've just started it like last week. So we don't even know how commercially viable it will be. Any other questions? Okay, if not, I'm going to go to this part. And I will warn you, students, that over here, your participation is required, because there are a few quizzes and there are a few interactive things that I will hope that you find useful to do. Okay, so only when you have the right mindset can you actually grow, right? So these are two different types of mindsets that people will tell you about. There's a growth mindset, there is a fixed mindset. A growth mindset basically views challenges as opportunities. You don't say, oh man, this is not going to work, I'm just going to drop it. You say, okay, how do I work around it? You acknowledge and embrace your weakness, versus the fixed mindset, which avoids challenges and shies away from things that we don't know. You would be surprised how often all of us do this. When we shy away from things we don't know, we're like, nah, that's really not my comfort zone. I would really prefer not to do this or to learn this because I don't know it. Whereas if you say, no, you know what? Yeah, it's true. I don't know maths, but I also know that I have to learn accounting in order to like get this thing running. Okay, if you embrace it, you're like, I'm maybe not the right person to be doing accounting for my company. Maybe I'm not the right person to become an accountant if I really don't like maths. Maybe when you acknowledge it and embrace it, then the solution is very clear, very easy, right? You're like, okay, find an accountant. Maybe there's somebody else who loves to do maths. Who knows, right? Learn to give and receive constructive feedback, whereas the fixed mindset is unable to handle feedback or criticism. This is very, very, very common in, again, I think it's a lot more common in many of us, because in school, we are taught that there is a right and a wrong. We're like, correct answer, good person. Wrong answer, bad person, you're not studying properly. What are you doing? So very often when somebody tells us this is not quite up to the mark, we immediately consider it we immediately put ourselves into the good person, bad person category. Your report is, lacks any kind of structure. There is no logic to it. If somebody tells you that, instead of saying, oh, okay, what is the structure of a report? How do I now write it properly? Our first thing will be, man, I'm a bad person. I suck at this. I hate this thing. That is, and I think I think I have to blame our education system a little bit. Like right from the time we are in school, right? I see this in my kids' schools as well. Oh, good person, Shambhavi or Durga or whatever. You have done your homework so well. You're a good girl. Versus somebody else, what are you doing? No homework only has been done for 3 days. Oh, you at this rate, you're never going to grow. All that stuff. So when you keep on hearing this from throughout your life, you are not given the skills to actually receive feedback and do it properly. Immediately you become defensive. No. Actually, my dog ate my homework. Actually, I spilled ice cream on it. No, I had done it, but somebody else forgot it in my house. My maid servant kept it off somewhere else. Immediately we kind of put the blame on someone else. It's not like, it's my responsibility. I'm going to take charge of it. That I think we all tend to kind of shy away from. And I already said whom I blame for this, but I think it's important to acknowledge that definitely for me, this was a hard thing for me to learn. Intelligence and talent is a dynamic and ever improving. This I see a lot in younger people, where they say, no, I am not intelligent. I just don't have this. Whereas when you say that, when you think that intelligence and talent is static, it does not develop after a point of time. When you're like, I cannot learn this new skill because I am wired like that. Why? It's just another thing that you have to learn in some ways, right? The fixed mindset does not carry any actions without seeking approval. The growth mindset prioritizes learning over seeking approval. Have you ever gone to any government office? They'll be like, I cannot sign this. I'll pass this along to my next supervisor. Nobody will take responsibility for anything. So until you go to the very, very, very top, and finally that guy will sign and then he'll give it off. Because everybody else down below him or her has been taught that they cannot take any actions without seeking approval. So next, the fixed mindset is focused on proving yourself. The growth mindset focuses on the process instead of the end result. So it's like saying, okay, fine, maybe I didn't pass my exam, but I gave my very best to studying. You have to be honest with yourself. If you watch TV for like 12 hours before your exam and then you failed, well, you clearly have not focused on the process. Whereas if you're always like, I have to prove myself, I have to be first, I have to be first, I am better than this person. When you're constantly comparing yourself to somebody else, that guy, when he was in 10th standard, he got 99.8%. I got 99. Oh, I suck. When you're constantly focused on comparing and proving yourself to somebody, whom are you proving this to? Like, does anybody care whether you got 99 or 99.8 or 89 or whatever? Would you remember this 10 years down the line or 20 years down the line? Probably not, right? We had a professor when I was in BTech who was so pleased with himself for the marks that he got in his first semester when he was in BTech. This guy was 50 years old. He was like, when I was your age, I got 24.5 out of 30 in this subject. Like, who cares, right? And he was all constantly used to go on about how he was one rank or the other rank. So don't focus on your ranks, don't focus on your end result, focus on what have you actually learned. Be inspired by the success of others. The fixed mindset gets threatened by the success of others. Man, that person got 80%, so she is now in line for first rank, not me. I have to do something better than that. So that would be a very fixed mindset kind of growth. Think of learning as brain learning, understanding how failure is an opportunity to grow. And this is a very important thing. A fixed mindset understands failure as a limit of ability. I failed, therefore I cannot do it. Versus a growth mindset, okay, I failed, but let me see what I have to learn in order for me to pass. Let me actually invest myself in that process of learning versus thinking whether pass or fail, right? All right, gives up easily, the fixed mindset. The growth mindset persists in the face of setbacks because you're thinking about what am I learning? How am I growing? Okay, maybe I didn't get this one particular pass, fail, rank, this thing, but how much have I grown during the process of doing this particular course or whatever? What are the common mindsets that hold us back? Okay, I'm not actually going to talk over here. It's 11:39. I am going to give you guys 3 minutes to type. You don't have to talk if you feel shy. What do you think are common mindsets that hold you back? At 11:42, we will read all these things. Please put it in the chat box. People are also directly messaging me, and that is totally fine if you don't want to put it out on the group for everyone to notice. That's I'm getting some really good, honest answers here. I'm really proud of you guys. You're putting in such honest and reflective answers. Good job, everyone. Okay, 11:42, and the sheer range of responses I've got is amazing. I'm going to read out the answers without talking about who actually wrote this. So, common mindsets that hold us back. Fear of judgment by other people. That seems to be the common thing for many, when I look at many of the answers. Absolutely. We're always worrying about what other people will tell or think about you. And that requires, I think, a huge courage to go beyond and say, you know what, I mean, it's a very real fear. Absolutely. Lack of confidence, yes. A prejudiced mind, absolutely. And the prejudiced mind comes back to this kind of fixed thinking, right? Where you're like, no, I don't think that is the right way of doing it. There is a right way and there is a wrong way of doing it. And what you are telling me is the wrong way. That's a clear sign of prejudice, right? Fear of being judged again. Like so many people have said, fear of being judged. This is so true. Fear of unworthiness, lack of confidence. Yes. Lots of people saying, how will people judge us? Fear of failure. Absolutely. That is a huge fear. Thinking I can't do this. So a lot of people have brought about this fear of failure. What if I try something and I fail? And then what will people say about me? It's like, yeah, you foolishly fell. Oh, you tried something which is beyond you. Now you failed. Now what are you going to do? That is something that we hear a lot, but it requires, I think, a great deal of mental maturity to listen, not accept, just listen to it, understand where that person is coming from, and then shed it to say, okay, this is your perspective, this is your context, but I am on my growth journey for which I have to do this. And therefore, if I don't do it, I would be stunting myself. To be able to do that requires a great deal of um, I think acknowledgement, just kind of saying, yes, I see where you're coming from, but this is different from where I'm coming from. Sulking over little things which might not matter 5 years down the line. So an inability to let go, right? You have something that would have kind of troubled you, or that you feel is unfair, that was done to you many years ago, but you can't let go of it because you're not able to accept it. No self-belief, a lot of self-doubt, fear of risk, a lot of things similar to that. When you say you don't deserve to be here, or they question one's abilities when they say, what the heck, you think you are good enough to form my institute? You think you are good enough to hang out with us? Fearing and worrying about what society will say. Society thinking, mindsets of looking to this thing, fear of the outcome that one will get. Lots of people have talked about this fear of outcome, and that is so true. I'm not as good as that person. I'm losing my confidence and the ability to show up in front of others. So when you're constantly trying to prove yourself. So I'm also putting up this fixed mindset versus growth mindset as I'm reading this out. So as I'm reading it out, I hope you're able to kind of follow through when I'm saying certain things, when you're like so focused on proving yourself, so focused on trying to get acceptance from other people, that all these are signs of fixed mindset. To switch from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset is very difficult. But if you realize, the first step to any difficulty is when realizing that you are in this fixed mindset, to realize that, hang on a second, this particular feeling that I'm going through, which is so difficult and so negative and which is sapping all my energy and confidence, this kind of mindset belongs to the fixed mindset. I need to now think, and this is a really hard process to do. I need to now think, how do I drag myself from this fixed mindset to the corresponding growth mindset? Constant need of validation by friends, because you're constantly trying to prove yourself and have other people say. So there is this lack of like thinking, yeah, I think it's good enough. That is not enough. That's not yet good enough. Other people need to tell me that I'm good enough. If I fail, the supportive effort fails as well, making me wonder if I'm worth it. So yeah, that again, when you're like, damn, I failed, all these people who helped me, all their efforts have gone to waste. Now, what is the point? And that again is a question of, thinking about the end outcome instead of this thing, right? Like when you focus on the end result, instead of focusing on the process. Accepting society's mindset, lack of confidence, comparing ourselves to others, waiting for the right time. So true. How do you know what is the right time and what is the wrong time? I think a lot of this is so. I think when I read out all these things, all of us can see this in ourselves, right? This is so recognizable, don't you think? How many of you have read The Alchemist? This Alchemist was like a book which was like everybody used to read it when I was in first or second year of BTech. I raced through it without really understanding it at that time. I was just like, oh, this is like, oh, I have to prove myself. I need to show people that I'm also reading the cool books. And then I don't think I actually understood it until almost like 10, 15 years later. So how many of you have read The Alchemist? If you've not read The Alchemist, I think I'm going to put it up on the everyone chart. Everyone. Oh, how do I get rid of this? How to... you read a few pages, Pradnesh. Very good. Every time you read it, you realize something new. Absolutely. Me too. In the middle of completing it. Very good. I'm trying to figure out how to post a message to everybody, and I'm not able to do this thing. Sorry, guys. I'm very... everyone. There we go. Got it. I'll put it up here. Alchemist Paulo. Those who haven't read it, please do read it. And don't be like me. Don't race through it. It's not a race. But there is a lot of stuff about, fear of failure and fear of when do you know when to start something? What if the right time never comes? Please do read it. I would love to hear your thoughts on it down the line. I think all my contact details are there in the presentation, which I can share. But that's actually one of the most fantastic books I've read, talking about how fear of change and fear of failure can actually cripple us. So what are the common mindsets that hold us back? Resistance to change. I actually forgot to write. Now I'm realizing, fear of judgment is a huge mindset that holds us back. I should actually put this up in there. I should actually edit this and do it. Resistance to change, inability to imagine or accept a different image of oneself. If you've been told all your life that you're going to be one thing, and then you realize that you're not been able to get that and you have to do something else, that can be a pretty traumatic experience. For my brother, he all his life wanted to become a veterinary doctor. He didn't do well enough on his in his 12th standard exam, and he became a dentist. um, he was surrounded by other people who all wanted to become MBBS doctors and who all got into dental college instead, and they all felt like failures. It took my brother a long time to kind of get out of that, to say, you know what, I'm happy to imagine myself as a dentist instead of a veterinarian or a doctor. And that took him a lot of internal struggles. Fear of success can be just as scary as fear of failure. In fact, even more scary, because once you succeed, then what do? It's actually a lot harder to succeed than to fail. Unconscious absorption of limitations. And this is something about what people are talking about, societal things. If society tells you, no, you can't do it, you are a girl and you probably should not be driving around at night. You're a girl and you should not be in mechanical engineering. These are things that we unconsciously absorb. For example, in my family, most of the women in my family have excelled in studies, but very, very few women have actually gone to work. They all got MScs, PhDs, this, that, and they all ended up being homemakers. So for a long time, for me to actually get past this limitation that I too could be something other than a homemaker, and that not only staying at home and taking care of kids and house is a lot of people, like a lot of women in my own family, they used to say, oh, you know what, studying and all is great, but you need to focus on your family first, because that's what they had done. And their limitation was that you can't do both. And for the longest time, I felt a lot of guilt. I was like, I'm doing this work, I'm doing that work, I really need to be spending more time with my kids. And that's an unconscious absorption of a limitation, right? Who says you can't juggle both? Who says you can't maybe cut down something and do something else? Who says you can't maybe ask your husband to take care of the kids a little bit? So these are things that I think women, especially women, absorb from everybody else around them. Need for appeasing others. And this is, again, I know this is International Women's Day, but this is not why I'm stressing on women so much. But for women, there is a societal and a deep-seated need to appease everybody else around you. If somebody tells you, it could be someone as close to you as your grandfather, or it could be someone like a neighbor whom you have once in a while you have conversations with. But if the need to appease people is so deep-seated that the moment somebody gives you a criticism, you automatically try to change yourself or say yes to them. And this actually has been one of the problems that I have faced as well, because I hate conflict. Like the moment people start getting a little antsy or jittery, I start sweating. My palms literally start sweating, and I immediately say yes to people to kind of placate them. Like, yes. You know what? This is too hard for you. No problem. I'll take care of it. Oh, you need to take 1 month off to take care of this. No problem. I'll take on that burden. That need for appeasement, until I realized that I was saying yes to a lot of things that were actually like ruining my life. Until then, I used to be like, yes to everybody. Yes, you're right. Yes, you're right. Yes, you're right. Taking ownership of one's life and choices. This again comes down to need for appeasing. When I say yes to someone, am I saying yes to it because I am making the decision to say that? Or am I so scared of the judgment of society and the judgment of these people that I'm saying yes to appease them? And that has actually been a difficult, but it has been, I think, the most powerful thing that I have been able to do. I'm not saying that I'm an expert at it. There are still many times when I go around saying yes just to maintain peace or whatever, or to keep somebody happy, but at least I'm a little more aware of it now than I was earlier. Assuming that you are alone or you have to do it all by yourself, carving a larger share for yourself in a small pie rather than making the pie larger. So what if I'm going to talk about this last one first, because what is better? Is it better to have like 8 people go and buy one diamond, or for you yourself to go and buy one artificial piece of junk? probably it's a lot better for you to own part of something which is much more valuable than for you to have a large part of something very small. Because the amount of growth and learning that you have when you get something that big is probably going to be a lot more. So one of the things that we tend to get scared of is, what if somebody takes advantage of us? If I do this, if I can do this by myself, then I have more control over it. Many times, bringing on 2 3 other people to help you, and you don't have to do everything by yourself, bringing on 2 3 other people to help you, and you kind of distributing some of the riches that you have, is a lot better than trying to do everything by yourself. How welcoming or resistant, and all growth happens due to change. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to hopefully not spend too much more time over this. Is it okay if I go about 5 or 10 minutes over time, Dr. Thomas? I hope it's okay.
Yes,
Anyway,
no problem.
thank you so much.
Yes.
So all growth happens due to change, and change is what really, really scares us. We get scared when we have to change either what we are or how we think or how we what we plan to do for ourselves. How welcoming or resistant are you to change? So there is a little form over here. If you guys have time, please do go ahead and take that quiz. I'm going to scroll right past that, because that gives you the key to the quiz. So do not do the quiz when you already read the key. Do the quiz first and then read the key. Otherwise, it's kind of pointless. So why do people fear change? Have you guys ever feared change? And if you have, what have you feared about it? So this is going to be group reflection. So please go ahead. I'm going to give you 3 minutes for this, from 11:57 to 12. Please think about, in your own life, why have you feared change? Have you ever felt fear change? And if yes, when and why? So I'm going to change this question to not why do people fear change. Let's make it a very personal thing. Why do you fear change? You personally. And each of you ask yourself this. And if you can think of some instances in your life where you have actively, been scared of something that's going to come, please talk about that. Yes, will I be able to accept myself for that change? Fear about stability in life. Yes, absolutely. Right. You think about the outcomes. You're like, what happens if this doesn't go the way I want? Change hasn't always been pleasant. So true. Yes. Getting out of comfort zone. Fear of whether I'll be able to achieve my goals. Challenges during adapting. Yes. Very, very real. Okay. Fear of criticism. Yes. So I think many of you have put it on the group so everybody can read it. And the direct messages I've got have also been very similar on very similar lines. Like, not adapting, leaving behind something that I know and going towards something that is unknown, fear of what the outcomes of something would be. All these are absolutely true. Fear if things fear if things don't go right after the change. What happens if your outcomes are not what you anticipate? What do you think? I'm going to bring this back over here. In the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. When all of us have these fears, right? We all worry about, I'm going to do this change, and then I'm going to maybe change my field of work. I've been in pharmacology or pharmacy for 10 years. Now I'm going to become something else. I don't know, like completely different. Electrical engineer, for example. Or something even more like, maybe you're going to start an NGO for something. What happens then? So a lot of this actually comes down to what kind of a mindset you have, right? If you focus on the process instead of the end result, if you focus on the learning that you are going to get during this thing, you are heading towards some objective that you have. You're like, I want to do this, or I'm going towards something which you don't yet know where you're going. But if you are focused on what you're going to learn along the path versus the outcome at the end, maybe you'll start an NGO, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll become an electrical engineer after doing 10 years of pharmacy, maybe you won't. But you're like, but the learning that I have on the way is what is going to be important to me versus whether I actually become this or not. Then the mindset changes, right? You're like, oh, what I'm actually looking for is growth. Maybe I've been 10 years in this field. Maybe I've not been able to grow in certain ways. That's why that hunger is there as well, for you to do something more. Many times change is not something that you choose. Many times change is something that is forced upon you. And that is actually quite traumatic. And that takes a long time to get adjusted to. For example, perhaps a death in the family of a member that you're very close to. When my parents passed away very suddenly about 3 years ago, it took me a long time to get past it. And I don't know if people ever get past it. And I'm sure many of you have such instances in your mind as well. Maybe you had to move places. Maybe you had to leave something and go somewhere else very suddenly. All these can be traumatic. But the fixed mindset focuses on the trauma. It doesn't focus on what has been achieved because of that change. The fixed mindset only looks at what went wrong. The fixed mindset does not look at what could have gone worse or what went right and how have I grown in this process, right? I think we talked about this. So for the most part, I would say, keep that fixed mindset, growth mindset thing in your mind, or keep that picture in your mind, because very often society as well likes it if we keep saying that we have been defined by one traumatic event in our life or one traumatic decision that we took in our lives. Because then they're like, this guy or this person was so promising, but that one mistake they did, and then the whole thing came crashing down. People love talking about stories like that, except that does not, and that is a trap, right? If you fall into the trap where you're like, my entire life goes to that one point of decision, if I do this or that, something will go traumatically wrong if I take the wrong decision. If you look at it like that, then you're going to be forever scared of taking any kind of decisions. You're always like, I'm going to take the decision that makes most sense to the entire society around me, where I'll be buffered by all their support in case things don't go right. There is no right or wrong. There is only growth. So if you focus on that, there is no right or wrong. There is only what have you learned and how have you made yourself into a better person. I'm going to give you an example of my fear example from my life of my fear of change. And it's about my mindset towards financial literacy. Most people tell you about literacy, like, that they talk about 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, which is like a British thing, which these in the 1800s, all these fellows came and told Indians, please learn how to read and write English and you can become our workers forever. If you think that is the only type of literacy, then you're falling short. I think there are at least 2 more types. I think there's emotional literacy. How do you learn how to read people in a group? How do you learn how to read emotions in your family? How do you respond appropriately? Again, I think women are better at this than men, because again, women have been conditioned from birth to be compliant towards certain things. Women are conditioned from birth saying that, soon you will be leaving your maternal home and you will be going to somebody else's home, so you have to get along with them. So women actually, I think, are very, very good at emotional literacy. Not all of us are works in progress, but certainly women are better than men when it comes to emotional literacy. But I'll tell you where women fail short. Women fail short completely when it comes to financial literacy. Men are taught, oh, by the time you grow up, you will have to take care of your parents, your wife, your kids. You'll have to take care of people financially. So right from maybe their late teens, men are conditioned to think about, how do I keep myself and my family financially secure? All the decisions in my family when it came to financial security, were taken by my father. My mom and had absolutely no idea what kind of life insurance, where had he invested. No, absolutely not. And when he passed away was when we suddenly were like, oh my god, there are all these things and we have no idea where to start. Financial literacy is something I feel I definitely was extremely poor at. And it's taken me almost 40 years to realize this. I'm the daughter of a banker. My father was a banker. So for me to say that financial literacy is something that I have been extremely poor at is actually quite a difficult thing. For me to realize that this is the truth, that I can no longer think of myself as moving from, if I have a job, I'm financially secure, is what I used to think. Very often that kind of converts to, okay, you have a job, you have a salary. What happens if you're suddenly unable to work? Are you still going to be able to get money? Are you still going to be able to take care of your family or yourself? No, because everything is linked to that one job, that somebody else is giving you money. Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world and one of the most successful investors in the world, said, you can only be financially free if your money is making more money for you when you're sleeping. If you are able to be financially secure in the knowledge that no matter what I'm doing, I could be on a holiday, I could be sleeping, I could be away, touring the world for 6 months. No matter what I'm doing, my money should be making more money, so that I'm not constantly having to work to be able to get some salary. This kind of financial literacy is absolutely lacking in today's education system. And this kind of literacy is absolutely lacking, I think, specifically for women. So all the girls who are listening in, please, first thing you do is understand how illiterate or literate you are when it comes to finances. Because finding a job is almost an irrelevant step in some ways, because that is only a tiny amount of money that it will give you. If you're depending on a job to become financially secure, then there is a problem. And the sooner we as a group realize this, the better we will be. Okay. On the flip side, so to realize that I needed to improve my financial literacy has been extremely stressful, because I'm like, oh, hang on a second. I really need to figure out what in the world some of these things mean. I don't think I actually know this automatically. I don't think the world is going to magically take care of me no matter what happens. So there have been many fears and many negative attitudes. I'm like, oh, please, I'm a scholar, I'm a scientist, I should not be thinking about money, I should be thinking about how I'm going to save the world. These kind of attitudes are basically creating mental blocks in me learning how to improve my financial literacy. On the flip side, the thought that pushes me to go ahead, and this actually I think is very similar to some of the fears that many of you have written over there. If I don't change now, how much worse would I make things? How much more would I be crippling myself and the people I care about? So when it comes to a thing like that, if I don't change, what would happen? So all of us think about what would happen if I make this change. We very seldom ask ourselves, what would happen if I don't make this change? Other mental blocks. One of the biggest mental blocks that I had to overcome was a fear of success. All of us from the time we are born, we are told it's okay, you try, if you fail, it's okay, we can do something else. We are always used, and we are told to understand how to deal with failure a lot more than we are told to deal with success. Success does not just mean getting to the right college, right? What do you do after you go to the college? What if you're not able to handle it? What if you're not able to understand that with success actually comes more work, and you have to now create more objectives for yourself, newer objectives and newer goals? And that can be really, really scary. The preparation for success is even harder than the preparation for failure. How much do you fear success? There is a quiz over here. Please go ahead and take it. So what helps when you actually have these fears? Sometimes it is easier to take ownership of your life and your decisions if you see other people who have done the same. So for the longest time, like I've told you before, like I had very few women role models who were working in my family. Every single person, beautifully, incredibly well educated, all the time, every one of them made the decision to stay at home and take care of the kids. Many times they were resentful of that. It was not something that they did joyously. It was not a decision that they were like, wow, I really want to spend this time to take care of my kids and my family and learn how to become the best homemaker in the world. No, it was like, no, circumstances have forced me to stay at home. That kind of thing leads to resentment. If you have a role model who's been able to juggle family and success and work and everything, really, whatever that person wishes, if you have role models who have taken ownership of their life and decisions, it's a lot easier to actually see yourself in certain roles. So I personally struggled for a long time to find female role models that I could look up to. There are, I think it's easier for, in some ways it's easier for men, because there are so many men who have done so many different things and who have been able to manage to keep um, their families secure and intact, mainly because they may have wives who are doing this, or mothers, or whatever. um, One of the reasons I feel more supported and able, especially in the past 12 months, is because once COVID started and I realized that either we had to go with the tide or we had to sink. That's when I started looking for different opportunities to do things during COVID. The moment I started reaching out, I found many more women who were in similar situations whom I could look up to and learn from. So women entrepreneurs with whom I've had the pleasure of working and learning from, these are three very great women. And I think I'm so grateful to have these ladies in my life. Shambhavi Nayak is finished her postdoc at NCBS, and she not only runs a company called CloudCrate, but she's also one of the only science policy experts in India. And she's actually represented India at multiple international fora. Angela Chowdhury is a dentist who did her MPH and now is a very successful director of a public health organization called Swasti. And she brings in $25 million a year to be able to do public health projects across the world. Manjula Das is, I think in terms of background, she's probably closest to mine because she also has PhD postdoc in science, who's also got a science company called Beyond Antibody. A second thing that can help us in addition to role models is actually focusing on our strengths. We all have been told from the time we are born, you are good at this, you're not good at that. Please focus on what you're not good at and try to strengthen yourselves. You are good at writing, but you don't seem to be very good at analysis. Why don't you now spend why don't you take a course on how to become a great data analyst? Why do we do that? Why do we always try to identify and correct our weaknesses? Why not identify our strengths and make them even better? So all of us are going to be good at something, right? When you just like close yourself and ask yourself, what am I good at? You'll get something on there. Then why don't you make that better? Instead of saying, yeah, I'm really good at dealing with kids, but I hate cooking. Then why in the world do we force ourselves to go to the kitchen and say, okay, now I'm going to make aloo paratha? Why? You'll just be like, hey, I'm going to hang out with the kids. I'm going to teach them. Somebody else can take care of the cooking now. Like that. This is a very nice quiz called the Strengths Finder. It is a 100-question test, but it is fairly quick because you have to go with your intuition over here. So these are, and it gives you like your 5 top strengths or something like that. For example, these are my 5 most whatever. These are my 5 strengths. Philomath means somebody who loves learning, and I think one of the biggest changes that I have made in myself in the past 10 years is I've try to really focus on getting away from this outcome mindset. I failed, I have passed, I have got this much money, I've got that money. Don't focus on the outcome. Focus on what have I learned instead. Well, I have learned to create a team. I've learned to work with different people. I've learned to build multiple labs who are able to serve these many people. I have learned so many other things along the course of doing this in terms of leadership, in terms of personal maturity, and so on. I like to be a coach. I like to teach people. I am a problem solver, brain solver, brain, whatever, stormer. And the most, this 5 is kind of funny. I told you how I hated conflict. So it's not a surprise that one of my strengths is peacekeeping, but you also know the flip side to it. Because I'm so worried about keeping the peace, I say yes to everything so that I can bring down the conflict. I dislike conflict like crazy. So this is something that I actually, while it is my strength, it is also a weakness in that sometimes you have to be able to fight for what you want and fight for what you think is right. And finally, committing to an identity that is bigger than yourself. Find an identity that you're comfortable in and don it like a cloth. So many times people have said, oh, are you a virologist? Are you a microbiologist? Are you a molecular biologist? Yes, yes, yes. But do I want to be known as a virologist or a molecular biologist? Not really. Like, I don't think I'm comfortable putting on this avatar of this fancy molecular biologist who goes around learning about, who goes around finding or discovering things about, molecules in a cell. I love writing, but am I a writer? No, that's not something that I want to do all my time either. Entrepreneur, businesswoman, all these are okay, but these are not things that really fit me. But the identity that I've completely embraced is that of a lifelong learner. Am I comfortable with that identity when I say, you know what, I just want to keep learning. I don't care about the outcome, but I have to feel really happy at all times with what I'm learning. When I embrace that identity, then everything in the world becomes something to be celebrated, not something that, oh shit, this was a bad experience, that was a good experience. Yeah, it might have been a bad experience for certain things, but what did we learn? We learned this. Yeah. And finally, this is, I think, useful for some of you people. When you set an objective to any project, we had never ever done diagnostic labs the way we did during COVID. My diagnostic output before COVID was 5 tests a week. And I would feel very happy. I would be like, wow, I ran 5 diagnostic tests today and I gave out 5 reports. Going from there to 2 lakh tests in 6 months was incredibly difficult. But the objectives that I kept for myself were very simple. I said, at the end of this, I only need 2 objectives. A, I should have learned and grown at least by 50 times where I am. And I should not lose money. I may not be able to make any money, then that's fine. But I should not lose money. So I kept my objectives very, 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 they were very much in line with my own heart. What I get stressed out is by loss of money. So I said, okay, fine. Let me say, I don't want to lose any money. I may not make like millions, but if I don't lose money, I'll be very happy. My outcome is already done. My outcome is not in terms of money. My outcome is not in terms of pass or fail. My outcome is not in terms of, I am defining my own success as I should not lose money. So easy tick, right? Okay, I just have to make sure that whatever decisions I take, I should not lose. My other outcome, the success that I have defined for myself, is that my learning and growth should be 50 times at least. Now, 50 times is obviously like a subjective thing. I could say 100 times, 1,000 times, whatever. But internally, I should feel that I have grown a lot in the past 1 year. And I think I have. So basically, I guess when it comes to, all of you were talking about fear of failure. And you said, what if I try something and I don't pass at it? I fail at it. Well, you define your own success, right? Maybe you're not getting 85%, but if you are at 30% earlier, maybe your definition of success is if you get 50, you've succeeded. Who says that somebody else's definition of success should be your definition of success? You define the terms of the game that you want to play. So core take home messages. Every successful business has to have those five fulfillments. It has to fulfill those 5 criteria that I told you about. Finding the right question to work on is a matter of continuous practice and learning. And learning really is about yourself. You may think that the right question to work on today is something that makes sense to you today. But 5 years from now, you're not going to be the same person, right? You would have also grown. And the right question for you to work on 5 years from now will be different. But whatever question you work on today has to make sense for you at that point of time. A successful venture does not just rely on you or your technical skills. It requires multiple partners and bringing in multiple key ingredients. So grow your tribe, grow your network. Think of yourself as a spider, and you're making this web of people around you. If you're a lone spider and you're just like kind of going tra la 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 la, you're not going to do much, because a lone spider can only eat one fly at a time. Only when it's able to catch that fly will it be able to eat it. But when a successful spider makes this web, gigantic web of multiple different things, then the web becomes bigger. So the things you catch in your web are also bigger. Sometimes you might have seen out in nature, one web will have many spiders. So think about that. Entrepreneurship fundamentally is a difficult mental journey. It has nothing to do with business sense. It has nothing to do with how much you're selling things for and buying things for. It is how you are growing. It is a mental journey where you have to confront many deep-seated fears on a regular basis. Fears of failure, fears of losing money, fears of judgment. You will face this, but you have to have the mental capacity to go beyond it. Learning to identify and work through these fears is ultimately one of the best rewards. And ultimately, it is a journey to understand oneself. You will find that the best entrepreneurs in business, anyone, are people who are deeply spiritual. People who read Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, they understand. Because ultimately, what you are is on a journey for realizing something that is bigger than yourself. So these are some of my role models whom I look up to. This is Kiran Mazumdar. I'm sure all of you know her. This is Kaila from Bharat Biotech, who's done the Covaxin vaccine. This is Vijay Chandru, who is the CEO of Strand. He started off as a scientist, and he's now one of the biggest brains in data analysis across the world. And these two gentlemen are the founders of Shanta Biotech, who made the first HBV vaccine. Okay, so here is my all my contact details. Feel free to get in touch with me. Any questions? I know I've gone a little bit over time. I'm really sorry for that. Any questions? Feel free to ask. Kindly share the links to the test. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to send you the PowerPoint, so you can just send it along to anybody who wants it. So Dr. Thomas, I'm going to send that right now. Sounds good. Let me stop share. Okay. Okay. Any questions or any comments so far? Have I made you all speechless?
Dr. Varsha, that was a great, exciting, motivational, inspiring. I think we can add on to the list. It was a great talk and coming straight from your heart, all your challenges and the ups and downs that you faced as an entrepreneur. I think that is the biggest message, take-home message that you have given everybody, is that don't look at outcomes, focus on your journey and enjoy your journey. I think that is what is the final outcome of where you are today. So thank you very much. I request Dr. Sneha to move on ahead with the session. And Dr. Varsha, it would be great if we could be able to see you.
I know. I'm so sorry. I cannot figure out. So my laptop fell a couple of days ago and I got it repaired, but I'm not able to get this.
So can we do
it down?
That you can quickly log in from another PC so that we can just get
Oh,
it to you?
yeah, that's a great idea. Let me get my phone.
Yes, sure. Yes, we wait.
Okay, let's see. Okay, start video. Hi, this is what I look like, guys. Sorry, it did not strike me at all that I could actually use my phone. Sorry about that. Slightly slow when it comes to technology, I guess. So, all right. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And yeah, I'm happy to share the slides and feel free to share them along.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Please do it. And we have some more questions.
Sure.
Actually, yeah. So, ma'am, the question is, what is your guidance for the budding entrepreneurs for the development of skills and knowledge during their academic phase, like when they're studying? So, what are the skills they should actually acquire at that time?
Financial literacy is the biggest thing. Please learn how to make yourselves financially secure. Most of the people who join my lab right after their MSc, 22, 23-year-olds, don't know about, they may know about savings bank, but that's about it. They don't know about insurance. They don't know about health insurance. They don't know about life insurance. They don't know about any of the skills and tools that exist to actually grow your money. And I'm not pretending like I know any of this myself, but at least I'm learning this. And I think, would you like to join the audio to speak? Okay, I'll join here and I'll get rid of this over here.
Ma'am, you were audible earlier, now you're not.
What is going on?
Now it's fine, ma'am.
Okay, great.
You're audible. Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I need two pieces of technology to get one Zoom call going. Sorry. So yeah, there's so many courses out there. There's so many people who are willing to help you if you just learn. If you just make it an objective for yourself to say, you know what, I want to be financially secure. You know what Warren Buffett said? He started investing when he was 11 years old. He's obviously, like I said, one of the richest men now. He said, man, I wasted 11 years of my life. I should have started investing much, much, much earlier. So imagine the power of compounding is immense. The sooner you start, the sooner you can actually get to a stage where you feel that you are doing something because you love to do it and not because you have to do it. So I would say if any skill that you should be spending your time on in the next 2-3 years of your undergrad, or your postgrad, depending on where you are, please learn financial literacy.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yes.
The next question which we would like to know from you is, which government fundings are there that support the development of startup in an early phase?
Yes. Many. Like, are you asking me for the government this thing? Oh, that was a question.
Yes.
No. There's tons. Please read up DBT, BIRAC. Your own startup Maharashtra should be something, na? Like, for example, in Karnataka, we have Startup Karnataka. Tamil Nadu has Startup Tamil Nadu. Each of those states have state funding. Then there is central funding through Startup India, and there is state funding through, I mean, all of you are pharmaceutical in the field of life sciences, really. So a lot of grants that are eligible for BIRAC, big biotechnology, are you would be eligible for. If you have an idea right now, there are 3 grant calls right now for funding for startups. So please go ahead and check out the BIRAC website, BIRAC. And they're very supportive. They give you up to 50 lakhs if you have a startup company of your own. If you are a student, there is something called BIRAC Sitare. That also has almost, I think, 15 lakhs or 20 lakhs or something like that. There's plenty of money. They just need good ideas and people who are enthusiastic about it.
When I was reading your CV, there was a portion of your career where you were working as a counselor, antenatal, postnatal counselor.
Yes.
So, would you like to comment on women's health in India with respect to?
So let me actually tell you a little bit about that phase. And I'm still quite closely related to that, connected to that. So I had done a PhD because that was the right thing for me to do societally. Society told me, oh, you got amazing marks. Why would you want to waste your time doing anything other than a PhD, that too in a fancy university in the US? Okay, so I said, yes, I will do it. I don't think I I had any idea what a PhD was. I don't even think that any of my research experience until then had shown that I was going to be any good as a PhD student. I was so immature. I had no clue what I was doing. And all I knew even then is that I didn't particularly like research, but I thought that is what I had to do because that's what people had told me that I should do. And that is what would be considered, cool, societally acceptable. That was the right thing for me to do because that's what would give prestige, things like that. So I joined the PhD for all the wrong reasons. I stayed in the PhD for all the wrong reasons. I somehow managed it. Wow. And I did a postdoc again for all the wrong reasons. You would have thought 6 years of doing a PhD might have taught me that maybe sitting in a lab was not the right thing for me. But no, I'm a little slow when it comes to certain things. So it took me 10 years to realize that maybe a PhD is not where I should be, or laboratory research is not what I should be doing. It took me a decade. Please, guys, be a little more, listen to your heart a little bit more, and realize what you like to do a little bit earlier than I did. Don't take 10 years to figure out what you want to do. So at the end of 10 years, I was so stressed out and I was so burnt out. I was not enjoying my work in a lab at all. But one thing nice that happened during my postdoc was I had written and won a grant, but the grant was through the School of Medicine. And one of the mandates of the grant was that I had to be part of the grand rounds, the clinical grand rounds, because I was getting funded by the School of Medicine. So I attended these grand rounds, and this was in a hospital called the Meggie Women's Hospital, and this was the largest hospital for women in the US. I think maybe it still is. So a lot of the experience that I got, the clinical experience, I got to talk to patients, I got to listen to the doctors and how they were thinking through a problem and how they would try to answer certain problems. And that had a huge impact on me. And I realized, you know what, I really dislike sitting in a lab. I hate it. But I really enjoy talking to women and learning about their issues and how those health issues can be solved. And so when we came back to India, I said, I do not want to enter another lab if I can help it. But what I enjoyed the most was counseling women. So I got trained as a counselor. This was one of those few instances where I was actually listening to my heart. So the amount of judgment I got from everybody at that time was insane. My parents were like, what the heck are you doing? Like 10 years of being trained in the US as a scientist, and you want to throw everything and start from scratch. I was already, I think, I don't know, 35 or 34 at that time. So, supposedly in prime earning capacity. And I was like, I'm going to ditch all these job offers and I'm going to ditch all this research nonsense. And I'm going to get trained. And I think I was earning 10,000 rupees as a volunteer at BBMP and at St. Philomena's as an antenatal postnatal counselor. But those 10,000 rupees gave me so much joy. And even now, I wrote a blog during that time because I was going through so much mentally and I had to unload all those thoughts. But today, when I look back on that blog, I'm so proud of myself for having had the strength to say, you know what, I don't want to do this. And I'm going to do something that really gives me joy. I did that and I was also, like I said, because I had all this research, I was like, who says I have to use all my skills only in a lab? I can do all sorts of research. Who says I have to sit in a lab and keep on pipetting random things? So I reached out to an NGO and I became their research director. And so the research that I was doing then was about women's health and access to women, what kind of access do women have for their health. So the two big research projects that I was involved in was one of the biggest things that they also got published recently was looking at when do women actually, let's say women are pregnant, okay? They go to some hospital during their pregnancies. But many women actually don't end up delivering at the hospital where they actually have a connection to the doctor and to the hospital. Many women are actually referred out of government hospitals. I'm only talking about government hospitals here, not private hospitals. Many women are actually referred out of the government hospital where they had all their antenatal checkups and they are sent to tertiary care hospitals. But They are sent after labor has begun. Imagine that you're in labor, you're like pushing, you're in pain, and then 90% of women in labor are sent from one hospital to another because they're like, we can't handle you right now. Doctor is in holiday, hospital doesn't have the infrastructure, we have run out of essential equipment in the hospital. So now please find another hospital for you to get referred to. So this was one of the research projects that we did, and it got published, saying that what are the distances that women have to travel to be able to give birth safely. So that was a life changing experience for me. The other thing that we did was go to a secondary level, secondary care maternity home in Bangalore called Banashankari. I don't know if all of you, how many of you are familiar with Bangalore, but it's in South Bangalore. And Banashankari is actually considered to be a referral hospital. So people are being referred from across South Bangalore to this place. This was one of the most dilapidated places, and they were waiting to reconstruct, like they were waiting to remodel the place. And so we were looking at things like what is the time from the time a woman comes to deliver to what is the time where she actually gets medical care, how long does it take for her to deliver, how many cesareans, how many normal births, things like that. And that was also a very um, we tend to kind of go around saying, oh, government hospitals so bad. But the people who actually work in government hospitals are so passionate about certain things. Like they are there. These are all, imagine, like many of us, after 12th standard, getting into an MBBS program is considered to be like such a great thing. Like, oh my God, I did this exam so well. I got into an MBBS seat. So our brightest people go into MBBS programs, and many of them are really passionate about wanting to serve the society, and so they end up taking jobs which will pay them less, which will where the prestige is lower, but they want to work in government hospitals. But the longer they work in government hospitals, the worse their expectations become, because there is so little reward when you're in the government system. You want to try to do your best for a woman and for her family and for society. But there are like a million regulations, and you have to wait for people to give you a basic, piece of cotton. Like you have to wait for people to give you basic supplies. You have to wait for people to give you the drugs that you have to cure this thing. So that was actually a huge, again, eye opener for me when I realized that I loved public health. It was not something to do with sitting in a lab or doing tests and things like that, but I enjoyed public health the way many people, we don't even hear about public health. Like I did a BTech in biotechnology in Chennai. The question of public health was completely unheard. Like nobody knew it. Public health was something like, oh, some random thing that doctors get down to doing. No, doctors can't do public health. It has to be everybody else who does public health. It has to be engineers, it has to be pharmacy. Clinical pharmacy, you would be surprised, has so much scope and is so desperately needed in this country. And I think clinical pharmacists themselves don't realize how much they are needed. So for people, for some of you who are struggling to find your place as clinical pharmacists somewhere, please realize that the power you have is immense. All you need is a place to harness it. And you may not be able to find that place in standard places that have already been established. There may be some places where you have to be, which are slightly off the beaten track, where people are desperate for people with your skills. So um, if some of you clinical pharmacists want to learn more, I'm happy to connect you to 2 or 3 clinical groups across the country who are doing amazing work connecting where they it's called integrated medicine models, where a doctor and a pharmacist work together for the treatment of a patient. Because a patient, like maybe in your own families, you may have a grandmother or a grandfather who are taking like millions of medicines every day, for one for diabetes, 3 for hypertension, one for some other muscle ache, this ache, one for acidity. Ultimately, they may be taking like 6 7 medicines every like 3 times a day, which is insane, right? But when a clinical pharmacist like you comes and you say, okay, let me consider the reason why these medications have been given. What are the side effects of these medications? Can I minimize the side effects, and can I reduce the polypharmacy? something like that, you would have such a brilliant effect on somebody's day-to-day life. So that's why I say you guys have immense power. So you have to know how to harness it. That's, I think I've talked a lot about. I'm not even sure if I answered your original question. Have I answered your original question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Thank
fine.
you.
Okay.
You really highlighted what is the actual state of, if I talk about Bangalore, which is considered an urban state, if that is the state in Bangalore, I'm not really sure how it's going to be in the other states. Now,
Absolutely. Yeah, even Maharashtra. Maharashtra has such amazing public health facilities compared to the rest of the country. So by all means, volunteer in some of these places, and your eyes will be opened. You'll suddenly be like, wow, with my education, with the opportunities that I have been given, I can do so much.
ma'am, one more question. You talked about the term networking.
Mm-hmm.
So we would like to know what kind of networking you did when you started your started your venture, and how you actually connected with people, means how it is
Correct.
actually happening when you actually in the field, how you do it.
That's a great question. And actually, in some ways, when I returned from the US 5 years ago, I did not have any network. I had some people in Chennai with whom I had done my undergrad there. So whatever few networks I had were in Chennai. There was nothing in Bangalore. So I kind of started from scratch. The way I built my networks were, one, I reached out to people who are doing work in where I wanted to work. So I reached out to all the birth NGOs related to women's health. I reached out to hospitals, and I got myself on multiple mailing lists online for uh, seminars and conferences related to women's health. So I kind of went there to almost every single session that I could find and talked to a bunch of people and told them, look, this is what I want to do. I don't know if my background has anything to do with this, but I feel like I have something to contribute because I have energy, I have enthusiasm, and I have a lot of time on my hands, literally. So that actually got me connected to and I made myself visiting cards. So I had very little written on it. I mean, at that time, okay, I had a PhD. So that is something that is, a PhD still has some currency. For example, but in your state, you may not have a PhD or you may not have an MTech, but you probably will have like BSc or BTech or something, right? So you put that in there. And then and then on the back of the card, I had put in all the things that I was skilled at. So I said, highly enthusiastic, ready to say yes to any project, willing to work really hard, and open to any opportunities in women's health. And that was, people remembered me, because they were like, okay, here is this woman who's trying to like switch fields or whatever, who clearly has some kind of a driving force that is pushing her to do certain things. She may or may not be whom we want, but we remember her. So that was one way. And then I connected with everybody. I would email them, hey, nice to meet you, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. 2-3 lines. Connect with them on LinkedIn. So they're also like, this woman, we met her for 2-3 minutes earlier, but let's see her LinkedIn page. So my LinkedIn page has, if you look at my LinkedIn page, I mean, I think one of you used your introduction based on my LinkedIn page as well. My LinkedIn page is really up to date. Everything that I do goes on my LinkedIn page. So that is something that I've learned the hard way as well, because the first thing people do is Google you. So if you don't have a thing coming up on Google, as soon as you put your name, then they're just like, oh, this is just another random person. You don't have to feel bad that you don't have a degree yet, if you don't yet have a degree. But why can't you must be having so many other strengths, no? If you have, you must have done something in your life that you're proud of. Put all that on your LinkedIn page. So people are like, this girl, okay. My husband, in his first CV, he put his cricket score because he was so proud of it. He was like, I scored, I don't know how many, whatever, runs, so many balls. Like clearly it was like a huge thing for him. So many years later, somebody reached out to him and they said, sir, I was so excited to see that you played cricket. And he was like, yes, I got a contact because of my cricket, not because of any of the other things that he has done in the past, since then, So put in things like whatever if you're interested in like hiking, put in your experiences, take a few pictures. You say, I hiked over here. People want to know that you are introspective. People want to know that you're thinking. You can't be like one of those Instagrammers who takes a picture of the food they've eaten and say, I ate here. Big deal. How does that make you different? But if you put a picture over there saying, I loved this dish because, like MasterChef, you know, the balance of the tartness and the sweetness was like this and like this and like this, then people are like, this person is actually thinking about her experience. She's not just taking a picture and putting it up, but there is a deep introspection and a reflection here. People want to know that you can think. They don't want to know about other things if they don't know that you can think. I think that is how you make a network. Is that answer?
Ma'am, and one last question from our side. What are your final words for the students who are listening to you?
Final words for? Sorry?
For the students with respect to entrepreneurship and life.
I don't think it's very different from what I said earlier. Goal should be for yourself. Try to learn what you want to do. There may be something that you are like, oh, I am now a pharmacy student and I have to have a startup in pharmacy only. No, nothing like that. You could be a pharmacy student, but maybe you also come from a village and you realize that there is something in agriculture that needs to be changed. Who is stopping you from from starting something over there to solve that problem? Entrepreneurship is to find a problem that you are passionate about and try to figure out how to solve it. It may have to do with it may be something related to your current area of work, or it may not. If it is, then great. You already have a network that you can harness. If it is not, then find another network. Build yourself another network which is more in line with your passion and your interest. Ultimately, it is a very personal thing. Like what really excites you and what do you want to be doing? That you only learn if you understand yourself a little bit better, which means you have to spend that time reflecting and introspecting on what you want to do. I'm going to turn off my video because I'm going to sneeze now.